gentlemen, this is Vince Miller. Thank you so much for joining me for this devotional. Today we're in Galatians chapter 1. I'm going to read verses 18 through 24. Paul says, "Then after 3 years I went up to Jerusalem to visit Cephas, or Peter, and remained with him for 15 days, so just over a couple of weeks. But I saw none of the other apostles except James, the Lord's brother." So just Peter and James. "In what I am writing to you before God, I do not lie." In other words, I'm telling you the truth. "Then I went into the regions of Syria and Cilicia, and I was still unknown in person to the churches of Judea that are in Christ." In other words, no one really knew who he was. They were only hearing it said, quote, "He who used to persecute us is now preaching the faith he once tried to destroy," end quote. "And they glorified God because of me." You know, sometimes when people see me, that's Vince, all they see is my natural self. They default to noticing my natural abilities of maybe speaking or writing or leading. And because of this, people miss a huge part of me, that part that makes me me. Let me give you an example. Today I was actually conversing with a guy at a local breakfast bar who asked me what I do for a living. And I told him what I do with men, and he was immediately interested in the skill and education and training that led to my work. I tried to explain my training while illustrating the spiritual purpose of my gifts, but he just could not get beyond the skills I had honed over the years. I realized that all he saw in me was a very natural man, and thus he missed the supernatural part of me, which is, I think, a big part of what makes me me. I think this same thing is happening with Paul. You see, some of the believers in Galatia perceived Paul to be an educated Jew who was now just a re-educated Christian. Essentially, he had become a follower of Jesus by his own means through the teaching of men like Peter and James. But Paul is debunking that. He wants them to see that he spent no time being trained by men and a lot of time being trained by Jesus in the Arabian desert. And he does this because he wants them to see Jesus, not just him. Yet he's got to work pretty hard with it because it's easier for them to see a natural man in a natural process. That's because grace working in our life is very, very hard to see. But Paul's going to work hard at describing it because he knows if they can unlearn this natural understanding, that they will unlearn with it legalism, and he hopes that they will learn about God's grace that leads to true spiritual life. Not a life lived by natural ability that's built on human training and skill and preparation, but rather a life given by God, empowered by grace that redeems a man's gifts, abilities, and talents, and now uses them for supernatural purposes in a supernatural effort that has supernatural results. So today, gentlemen, here's what I want you to do. I want you to think and ponder over how God's grace is daily redeeming your gifts, your abilities, and your talents for His purposes. And then I want you to give God praise for this by sharing how God does this in the comments below. I am sure it'll be a nice little moment of praise for you, but it also might stir up some other man who reads it today, because there are other men out there who need to live in God's grace today, who are living in human effort and exhausted by it. So just like Paul is trying to get us to understand how Christ has empowered him by supernatural effort, I want you to do the same for other men in the comments below. So fellas, thanks for joining me today. I pray that your story will inspire somebody else, that your grace will inspire them to live in grace, not in human effort. It's exhausting. And with that, I'll see you right back here again tomorrow.